This episode is sponsored by OpenText, the information company. We power and protect information. Our purpose is to elevate every person and every organization to gain the information advantage. OpenText works to power the ubiquitous information around us to elevate everyone. We strive to help customers simplify their systems with frictionless automation and equip them to thrive and grow in a digital world. The LoadRunner family is one of many solutions where OpenText can help. Did you know that LoadRunner has the largest community of load testing professionals in the world? Check out the QR code or go to their website at opentext.com to find out more about the LoadRunner family. Hello, it's time for the SMC Journal podcast. This is the show that is all about making IT software better and faster and more efficient today. How do we monitor it? How do we scale it? How do we make sure that it performs well? Is it secure? All of these things we cover on this show. I'm Scott Moore, your host, and I appreciate you being with me. A couple of things you'll probably notice: we're back in our regular studio, and I'm so glad to be back. I've been on the road for quite some time. I'm not going to be around long. I'm going to hit the road again on the performance tour again. We've got more interviews to do, live events, etc. Can't stand still too long, but I am glad to be back in the regular studio. I do notice that Agent 503 is going to need a little bit of a refresh, so expect him to change here in the next episode or so. A couple of shout outs before we really begin, which I want to thank Flux Ninja for sending me this. Found this in the mail when I got here. Flux Ninja, they were on the podcast several episodes ago, a few weeks ago, and they sent me these socks, handy dandy, flashy socks. I will be showing those off in the near future. They also sent me this bag, but I took the carry bag and I actually just put it on the wall of swag because it matched the lampshade so well that they get a free little plug here. Now, if you'd like to get on the wall of swag, you can send me a private message. We can talk. Another thing that came in the mail was this book, not a book on testing, the book on testing by Alex Rodoff of QA Consultants. I've done a lot of work with QAC, Brian Berknoff, James Pulley. They've been on the show quite a few times. Want to read this book? Looking forward to it. I'm also looking for an autograph from Alex in the future when we meet in person, which I hope is very, very soon. So thank you, everybody. And let's talk about the subject today, Apache Kafka. Some of you have already experienced Apache Kafka because you work in one of the Fortune 500 companies, and probably half of them use Kafka. Some of you are wondering, what is it? It is a platform for event streaming. Well, that's great, Scott, but what is event streaming? Okay, that according to the documentation from Apache, you can think of Kafka as like a central nervous system for your software. You have software that talks to the clients, the servers that talk to their clients. But if you want something that goes across all your applications to bring everything together and provide some real-time data where you can make decisions or monitor or do some things based on that, you need this event streaming platform. Plenty of use cases for it. Some of the most popular ones, if you are getting an Uber ride, how does Uber know where those cars are at any given time? Because they're changing their position constantly about how fast they're going, what direction they're going. How do they know who's near you? And then when they start sending messages on their platform between you and that Uber driver that's been selected, and you're getting updates to how close they are. I mean, that's a lot of real-time information that needs to get back and forth. It needs to be scalable. It needs to come back in a short period of time. Same thing for Netflix. You watch a movie after you're done with the movie, because you watched Sasquatch Eats New York, we think that you would like the Sharknado movies, right? So how do they know that you just watched that? So they're giving you real-time updates and recommendations based on that. That's how they're pulling this stuff off. So the big companies use it, and it needs to be scalable. Hint number one, these messages need to come back in very low amounts of time, low latency. So we're talking 10 milliseconds or less. That's another red flag. And so if there ever was a use case for needing load testing, stress testing, performance testing, Kafka would be one of those things. And so how do you approach load testing an event streaming platform where you have something that's publishing information and messages all the time and going out there, but then you have consumers of that information across your entire enterprise. How do you even do that? Well, that's the topic today. Our sponsor, OpenText, the owners of the LoadRunner family, have a solution for that. LoadRunner recently added in a new protocol just for Kafka, and it includes not only the actual recording and functions to be able to create a script against a Kafka application, but also a Kafka monitor that monitors the producers, the throughput, and the message rates and things like that, so that you can actually use LoadRunner the way that you have done load testing for web applications, Citrix, or any of the other applications in the past, but specifically for Kafka. So it can be done. And I would like to show you on this podcast a demo of how that actually works. So we've got a demo application, and we're going to walk you through about an 8 to 10 minute demo of how to use VUGen, the script recorder in LoadRunner, to create the script and play it back, and then how to run it within a load test and monitor some of the load profiles and different things. So I'm going to show this demo, and then we'll come back and show you some references for you as well.
We have a topic. There is data that is sent to this topic that different applications subscribe to. For example, a data producer might be a warehouse scanner. In fact, we're going to use an example of that for our demo. This data producer will send data to a topic, and then a consumer, in our case, VUGen, is going to act as a consumer, capture the messages, and deserialize the message, which means deciphering and understanding and parsing that message so that it becomes something that can be processed by the application. Now, this is done through a recording process, just like any other VUGen protocol. However, on playback, of course, you have a topic, but now the playback, the virtual user generator, becomes a producer. It serializes the messages. In other words, it packages them up in a way that's understandable to the consumer, and it sends those messages out to the topic. And in this case, the consumer will be a warehouse dashboard, which again we'll use for our demo purposes. Let's start by describing the environment we're going to be using for our demo. Now, I have a Kafka server running in the background, and I also have an application that is comprised of two major components. So the first part is a producer. It generates messages out to a topic, and think of it as a client. In this case, think of it as a scanning application that will scan a product in a warehouse. It includes an order number, a truck number. It has a destination state and a pallet where this product will be placed. Now, this is sending messages, it's producing messages, but the consumer on the other end will be a dashboard. This dashboard will take those messages in that topic and it will process them. It will provide a status, an assigned route, an assigned driver, and expected date of arrival. So for example, if my scanning application on the left-hand side, I generate a message, and then when I refresh the screen, I will see the message received by the dashboard, and it'll show the route, it'll show the warehouse status. The driver, Lisa in this case, will be driving the truck, and the expected arrival is in May of 2023. Now, part of this, of course, is going to be capturing those messages or that traffic as it crossed the wire from producer to consumer and the various topics. And for that, we're going to be using Virtual User Generator from LoadRunner. Let's go ahead and create a new script using VUGen. And the script we're going to create, of course, is a Kafka script. Now, this is going to be a capture and replay type of operation, so very simple. Here's our plain script. We're going to start recording. And a couple of things I want to point out. Right? One of the things that I want to point out immediately is that there is configuration files. Now, the configuration will hold things such as the server information, the different serializers and deserializers. In other words, the way that Kafka is going to recognize the type of data and be able to decipher the data that is coming across. Now, we can point to a file that we've already created, or as you can see shortly, we can define that file within the recording options. The next thing are the different topics. So we have a scanner and we have a dashboard. Then we have things like router events. Those are messages that pertain to the routing of the products, right, that we have in our warehouse. And then we have scanner events. These are the events related to the scanning activity by the employees in the warehouse. Let's go ahead and look at some of the recording options now. So we have a logging option. We can provide different levels of logging, brief or extended if we're debugging the script. And then we have the code generation. Where do you want the information to reside once we create the script? Now, probably one of the simplest is to save it within the script itself as a new file, or we can insert it directly into the script. In other words, have the statements generated to show the operations within the script itself. But I like to keep things simple. I have a file named scanner that will include the information. You'll notice that it's for the producer in this case. Now, the next thing that I want to show is the configuration files. And here's that myconfig that I created earlier that includes information such as the Bootstrap server. This is basically your Kafka server. Then you have the serializer. In other words, how do we take the data apart? How do we recognize it? Because Kafka can work with a wide range of data, from plain text to JSON and more complex types. So this is basically saying, what is the class, the Java class, that's going to be able to serialize and make sense of that data, right, from a consumer perspective. The other thing, though, is the serializer. The serializer is the opposite operation. How do we package this data so that it makes sense to the consumer ultimately, right? When we send these messages out to the different topics. Then we have a couple of other options, things like the virtual machine settings for Java, and then the class path for any additional libraries and jar files and things that are important to the script working. So very simple, very logically laid out, but also very powerful. Now, once we have these options set, and it becomes a simple capture or record operation. Once we hit record, you're going to see the window minimized, and we get the recording bar for VUGen. So you see the events. Right now we're standing up one event, but here's our application. We have a client, I guess you could call it. It's the scanner application sending messages to a topic, and then of course we have our dashboard that's going to consume those. So let's go ahead and select a couple of items here. We're going to select a truck, a state that this is supposed to go to. This is going to Colorado, and I'm going to assign a palette. And as soon as I click send, you see the messages are being sent to the topic, and VUGen is picking it up. Now, in this case, VUGen is acting as a consumer. It is reading those messages, and if you recall, we have a deserializer defined so that it knows how to take that data apart. In this case, of course, very simple data. But we see the information reflected in our dashboard, and we see it reflected as an event. So let's go ahead and do a few more messages so we have some good data to work with. In fact, we're going to click on the send a couple of more times so that we have a nice list of orders and statuses and things of that sort. So now let's go ahead and stop the script with the recording, if you will, and let's look at the data that's generated. So we have a script, just like any other script, right? And we see the different actions on the left-hand side. We have an init section, an end section. So just know that even though this is a Kafka protocol script, it still behaves as any other virtual user. So you have runtime settings, parameterization, you have different actions, different functions that you can define. But more importantly, here is your script, and here are the different messages. Notice that there's a deserialize function. So basically, it took the message and it is able to take it apart and read the internal part of the message. So we know it's string data. We know that here's an order number, the truck that was assigned, the state that it's going to, and then the palette. So these are all values that can be parameterized, and it's all directly within the script. Now, playing this back, very simple, just like any other VUGen script. I go ahead and click on run, and we're going to see that it generates those messages, or basically it plays it back. When I play back, the key here is that VUGen is now acting as a producer. So before, we were acting as a consumer, reading data, listening to messages. We were subscribed to a particular topic, and we were listening to that data as it hit the topic. Now we're on the opposite side. Now we're acting as a producer. We are essentially regenerating this data that we captured in the script. As a matter of fact, if we go to our dashboard, and let's go ahead and clear the dashboard, and let's go ahead and rerun our script, and we should see those messages now regenerated. So if I click on refresh, you see that the data is now regenerated. So, it's just basically it's bypassing or ignoring the client or the scanner in this particular case, and just subscribing and listening to those messages as they come across to a particular topic, and of course, deserializing them. Right? So I need to stress that because it needs to know what to do with the data. That's where the deserialization comes into play here. Now that we have a working script, the next step for us is to take this single virtual user and we're going to create a controller scenario. And again, this just happens to be a Kafka script, but this becomes like any other virtual user. So we're going to go back and we're going to create a controller scenario. We're going to run, let's say, 10 virtual users, and we're going to just leave the name as Kafka for the root name. We click OK. This is going to bring up our controller, and it's going to generate the scenario for us. Now, before we kick this off, I want to show you 3 monitors that are specific to Kafka. We're going to add those to the scenario, things like the Kafka producer duration, Kafka throughput, and then Kafka message rate, or how many messages we're pumping through the application. So let's go ahead and kick this off and watch what happens. We click on Start, and we're going to let our graphs populate as the scenario kicks off. We're starting to see some good data being built by the different monitors here, right? Of course, we have the number of running virtual users. We have specified 10, so it's slowly ramping up. We have the transaction response time, just as any other typical performance test. But again, we also have the various Kafka graphs specific to a Kafka application. But I want to show you, right, as this runs, here is our consumer, right? So again, we're acting as a consumer, right? Because we're running a script, so we're generating that data. We're sending messages to the various topics. And when I click on refresh, you can see, of course, that this is a ton of data that's being generated by our performance test. So in summary, we created a virtual user by consuming the messages generated by the producer, in this case, the scanning application. We captured that data as part of a script. We did this by listening to the topic where these messages were sent. Next, we turned things around and we had VuGen generate the messages and essentially turning it into a producer. On the other end, there is a consumer to capture those messages. In our case, it was the dashboard application. Then we finished by creating a complete load testing scenario that you see running here, and with multiple virtual users running the test and monitoring the Kafka specific traffic that you see on the screen.
All right, that's load testing Apache Kafka. Now, if you want more information about how all this stuff works, it's very easy to find on the internet from the ADM documentation from OpenText. So I'm going to take you to the first page that I'm recommending, which is the Kafka protocol documentation for LoadRunner. And it talks about what the protocol is for. It allows you to create a virtual user script to monitor the health of Kafka deployment, run these scripts. There's several areas to this, how you can manually create a script in VuGen, what all these functions are. There's actually, in the function reference, there is a function reference for Kafka functions. And there's also this page here, which is for Kafka monitoring. So the Apache Kafka monitor monitors the producers and the consumers, and you can see there the main monitors that they have. And of course, you'd be adding standard monitors as well for underlying things like the operating system and what have you. And then I'm going to also share a couple of videos with you that I found on YouTube. That's just top, you look for Apache Kafka and it says, Kafka in 5 minutes, Kafka in 6 minutes. It just kind of explains more detail about Kafka in more detail than what we can share on this, because I'm assuming that you are either experiencing a need to load test it, you have some understanding of Kafka, but you need to have a load testing solution. But if you don't have that context, these videos will definitely help you on that. And then another place to really start is the Apache documentation themselves, which can be found at kafka.apache.org/documentation, and it just kind of takes you through the beginning stages of, okay, what is event streaming? What do I use it for? And how do I do this? So it tries to give you kind of a breakdown of that and then walks you through actually doing more with it. So I thought that that was an interesting topic to discuss on today's show, but you may say, no, it's not. tell me. I want to hear from you. Give me some feedback. You can find me online in many different places. Just scan the QR code or go to that link list that I have there, and you can find me on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and other places. You can also just send me a quick email to heyscott@smcjournal.com. Real easy to find, and would just love to hear what you think about this. And if you know about other solutions, I'm sure there are other load testing solutions where people have load tested Kafka in the past. I mean, there's been a need for it before this protocol ever came out. So if you've done that, how did you load test Kafka in the past, and what were your results? If you like this kind of content, would be great if you subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can either go directly to it from that URL, to scan that QR code, or just search for it on YouTube. You can find my channel, Scott Moore Consulting, right there. So until the next episode of the SMC Journal, this is Scott Moore thanking you once again for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.